and welcome to the seminar on palm and coconut sugar. My name is Graham Dixie. I'm the Executive Director of GrowAsia, and first of all, welcome him. We've had 60 people register for this, and so that's a tremendous response, and thank you very much for that. But let me just give you a little bit of background. GrowAsia works with smallholder farmers. Our intention is to increase their profitability and their sustainability, and we work in 5 countries across the region. And when we ask the 500 or so different partners, what do they want out of the GrowAsia network? They always say the same 2 things. They want to learn new things, and they want to find out and meet new partners and potential partners. And what GrowAsia tries to do is to join the dots, is to bring together those people and those ideas so that new businesses, new opportunities emerge for the smallholder farmer to increase their income. And smallholder farmers have particular characteristics. Smallholder farmers need to be able to generate a lot of income from a small area, and typically this is around labor-intensive crops. And that is one of the reasons why we focused on this study on palm sugar and coconut sugar, because this is a labor-intensive crop. It's a crop which you can generate quite a high income from a small area, and it's a crop in which the market opportunities are changing and growing. So we commissioned a study to look at what the market was, how it was changing, where the opportunities lay, but also to look at some of the emerging new technologies, both in processing and in production, that are emerging across the region. Because it is by exchanging those ideas and accelerating the exchange of ideas and amplifying the dissemination of those that we should be able to get palm sugar embedded as a much more successful and larger scale opportunity that smallholder farmers can take advantage of. So at this webinar, we have Justin from Ananda Consultants, who's done a fantastic job in pulling together this research and creating a very clear idea of what's happening to the markets. And then we have 2 very special people that are joining us. Clement from Unilever in Philippines, who is a buyer of coconut sugar and has a sense of the new opportunities that are emerging amongst the agribusiness community. And then we have Tio, and Tio is very unusual. He is an entrepreneur and a technical man that has been working in this sector and is at the cutting edge of some of the new production and processing ideas. So we've got 3 real experts that are going to be able to take us through this process of learning what is the markets, what is the production, what's happening in this sector, to try and create what I hope will be a community of practice and a much greater body of knowledge amongst those of us that are listening. So over to you, Justin.
Okay, great. Thanks, Graham. And welcome to everyone that's joined us. It looks like we have a few more that are popping in and probably will for the next couple of minutes. But we do want to jump into the substance of the conversation today. Before we get going, I want to remind everyone that we will be opening up after about a half an hour of kind of presentation and discussion from our side, from myself presenting the research, and then some comments from Clement and some comments from Teo. We'll be opening it up to questions and answers. The way that we're collecting those questions is through the chat space on the GoToWebinar. So we will be collecting your questions. If you could please, if you do have questions, please type them into that chat space, and then we'll essentially at the end of those first 30 minutes then open it up and start to answer those questions. So without further ado, let's jump in. I will present a summary of the research that was conducted, and that will take us about 15 or 20 minutes. At which point I'll pass the conversation over to Clement, who will share some of his thoughts and experience, and then finally we'll hear from Teo in terms of his thoughts and experience from the entrepreneur side. It's important to note that we won't be able to go into all of the detail of the research. Our goal is to share with you first the methodology of the research, so that you have a sense of how we've gone about it, the type of information we've collected, and the analytical frameworks that we've used. Second is to share with you the top line insights from the research, and to open up kind of some of the areas that we think are going to be important for the industry to be considering, both as individual actors, but also collectively as you consider pathways to growth. And then finally, to make sure that you're aware of what's in the deeper study, so that if you want to go back to that deeper study, you have a little bit of a roadmap to see where you can click down to find more detailed information about any particular country or any particular segment of the market. Okay, great. So let's jump in. Apologies, I'm going to go through this. It might feel a little bit quick, but again, we don't want to dwell too much on detailed information. We kind of want to make sure that everybody has a chance to be exposed to the top line of the outputs. And then in the discussion section, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box, and we'll be able to address them then. So essentially, over the next 20 minutes, we'll talk about the research scope and methodology, the top line takeaways. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about the global market landscape, and then we'll share with you some of the country profiles. We did 3 in-depth profiles where we both did secondary and primary research. That was in Indonesia, Philippines, and Cambodia. We also looked through desktop research at Myanmar, but for the sake of time today, we won't be going into Myanmar. However, there is a section, a smaller section on that's compiled from desktop research on Myanmar that you can go to in the original study. Okay, so first with the research scope and methodology, we, from the market side, we did a global and a regional market scan, and we'll see that those markets are very, very different, and it's important to keep that into consideration. As I said, we looked at Indonesia, the Philippines, and Cambodia to do some country benchmarking, and some interesting insights came out that show that the production side is very, very different across the region. Our approach was an economic analysis of the full value chain. Myself and my team are economists, we're not agronomists. And that's important to recognize that while we did explore factors of productivity, this is not a detailed agronomic or technical analysis of production and processing. Certainly, we think that based on what we found, that is a useful exercise to do, either for individual actors or collectively in a particular country across the region, but we did not do that. Finally, we did seek to synthesize what we were learning into some emerging, what we saw as priorities for action in terms of supporting industry growth, and we can talk a little bit about those. Okay. So first, just a little bit of scoping, and I know most of you on this call will know this information already, but it is important to recognize that we were dealing with, in terms of coconut and palm sugar, we're actually dealing with 2 very different products. In the end market, in a certain part of the end market, the global market of powdered sugar that sits on the shelves of supermarkets in the US and Europe and the Middle East and increasingly Asia, the product is, those products are almost perfect substitutes. In fact, certain retailers are calling it coconut palm sugar, and we'll see an evidence of that. However, on the production side, of course, they come from very different sources. They have similar characteristics, but in terms of the aesthetics of the trees, but otherwise, there are very different factors of productivity, from the landscape to the rainfall to the soil, and you can see a table that kind of highlights some of those differences between the arenga palm and the coconut. So it's important to keep that in mind. As well, on the product side, while the global market has really rallied around the powdered sugar form, of course, the region knows both trees for a range of different products. And it's important to keep that in mind. The sap-based products are fairly similar in terms of the sugar and the spirits and the vinegar. However, the non-sap-based products are quite different, especially when we think about the coconut tree. Whereas the coconut tree, the nut can be used both for edible purposes and non-edible purposes. What's important is that from the coconut farmer's perspective, there is, in some instances, an optimization equation that has to be solved, where it's a choice between, do we go for the sap or do we go for the nut? And as the markets are developing, especially around coconut products, that's increasingly a conundrum for farmers and coconut entrepreneurs. Okay. So in terms of the country benchmarking that we did, you can see we looked at Cambodia, Indonesia, and the Philippines. And these markets are very, very different. On one end of the spectrum, there's Indonesia that has a long heritage of using coconut sugar in its cuisine. It's a sweet palate and is by far the largest domestic market of the three. You can see estimated production of approximately 400,000 metric tons per year, with production that we'll see concentrated in Java. The Philippines, interestingly, the coconut industry emerged in the mid-20th century and is very much an export industry. And for coconut sugar, those exports are, there isn't a sweet cuisine tradition in the Philippines, so it really is an export driven market. For Cambodia, there is a heritage, but of using palm sugar. It is entirely palm sugar, so coconut trees aren't currently tapped for their sugar, it's only the palm trees. And you can see the difference in terms of production, only 14,000 tons produced per year, and very underdeveloped, limited production and processing at this point in time, although some emerging models that are growing quite well. Okay, so let's just cover some of the top line takeaways of the research before we get into the specifics of each of the countries. First, as we mentioned at the beginning, coconut and palm sugar aren't formally tracked nationally or globally in trade flow databases. That presents an issue of both market recognition and product recognition, as well as standards and certifications. And it was interesting because as we were trying to evaluate the global market, it provided an initial constraint as economists for us in understanding what that is, because it all gets mixed in with cane sugar. And so we see that as actually an urgent need is to distinguish the product. The market, the end market is distinguishing the product, but right now the systems are not. Demand globally it was growing quite quickly in the US for powdered sugar, but is starting to flatten out. However, it's taking off in Europe, China, Japan, and the Middle East. So there's a growing global market that's driven, we'll see, by a questioning of the use of cane sugar. And we're seeing that demand is varying in the region. As we said, Indonesia is by far the largest market, and that's really based in the demand for the sweet soy sauce that is widely used in Indonesia. That demand, we'll see, has been growing and hitting some supply constraints in Indonesia, which is creating a market opportunity for scale. But to meet that opportunity will require higher levels of on-farm productivity and consistency from the farmers. And so the question is how to then do that. On the production and productivity side, we're finding that production models vary widely across the region and are really based on heritage and legacy practices. Mm-hmm. So these are local farmers that for generations have been tapping these trees. And certainly that provides an opportunity because it is in two of the three countries an indigenous product. However, it's also providing a constraint because as there is opportunity for market scale, those legacy practices are showing themselves as not being as productive and efficient as they could be. So consequently, productivity does widely vary. There's a lot to learn from the three countries for each other. We also found that because there is huge market opportunity and there's cost pressures, adulteration is pretty widespread. Mm-hmm. So there's it was most evident in Indonesia, but it's also in the other two countries where farmers are mixing palm sugar with cane sugar. Mm-hmm. And other mixtures, and that's causing some risk globally as exporters are exporting product. If that product isn't pure and it gets to certain markets that are paying a premium price for it, fairly quickly those buyers are turning sour to the product, and that's a risk for the entire industry, at least on the premium side. We're also finding, and we'll hear from Theo a little bit about this, that there are opportunities across the value chain for real systematic research in both technology and processes to improve productivity, from harvesting to cooking, to organization of the farmers. and we would encourage everyone that has an opportunity to play that role to think about what more could be done to enable this industry to go through a natural process of evolution. Okay, so let's talk quickly. You can see from the packages what I had said: coconut, palm, sugar. I believe that's for the U.S. market. So packaged either for a Whole Foods or a Trader Joe's. But you can see it's kind of they're even mixing the two products. Okay, so the global market landscape globally with powdered sugar, palm and coconut sugar sit in the non-cane sugar sweeteners. That market is divided into the artificial sugar sweeteners and the natural sugar sweeteners. The natural sugar sweeteners over the past couple of years have been registering the fastest growth and are expected to continue to do so. There's a shift towards products like stevia and licorice root extract and monk fruit extract. Palm and coconut sugar sit in that space. And what's interesting though is that for now at least, in the US, stevia, you can see the difference in terms of estimated market size. So in 2015, the estimated market value for coconut sugar was valued at $22 million US, whereas stevia is valued at $430 million that same year. So you can see kind of the difference. Stevia has penetrated the market to extent that coconut sugar hasn't yet, and it would be interesting to explore why. In Europe, what we're finding is that the importers for now are concentrated in Northwest Europe, UK, Netherlands, and Germany, where there's the greatest consumer interest in natural products. Now, what we're finding is that market growth is really driven by three factors. First is consumer backlash against cane sugar, and really that's driven by both a recognition of some of the risks of cane sugar over the long term, but also some interest in whether palm and coconut sugar have a different set of health characteristics, and that's under debate. And there isn't really conclusive evidence. We tried to find some conclusive evidence. There are certainly some papers that have piqued interest and helped to stimulate market growth globally, but the jury is still out from the health perspective about whether there actually is a substantial benefit to choosing palm and coconut sugar over cane sugar. But for now, at least, market perception is that there is, and so people are going that way, especially in markets where diabetes is of high significant risk. The second dimension is the preferences for natural and healthier products, and then the third is interesting. Actually, it's an expansion of the palette globally, where people, consumers in the U.S., in Europe, and Asia, through their exposure through media, are interested in other cuisines, and so their palette is expanding. They're interested in experimenting more, and they're watching these celebrity chefs introduce new types of cuisines from around the world. And so palm and coconut sugar fit into that category of experimental products. Maybe it will taste a little bit different. And so it's not just about health, but it's also about a different type of palate, a different type of use, and interest in doing things a little bit differently in their own kitchen. So let's dig into the specific countries, and we'll start with Indonesia. As we said, the largest market in the region by far. It's really organized around the sweet soy sauce. So it's essentially an industrial market. So the local producers feed into a local value chain for the production of this sweet soy sauce. And it's not produced as powder form, it's produced in block form that then is sold into the sweet sauce manufacturers that use that block coconut sugar to produce the sweet soy sauce at scale. It's interesting, 85% of that production comes mostly from Java. So it's heritage production. This is an activity that's been happening in Java for generations. And it just so happens that there has been scale and expertise at the household level to feed into that market chain up until this point. But what's happening is as rising demand, and we see that rising demand has led to a fourfold increase in prices since 2004. So as demand has been increasing, we're starting to bump up to some supply constraints. So the growth in production is now being held back by the availability of land and the productivity of the industry. And we'll hear a little bit from Clement a bit later about that. In addition, what's holding the industry back is an antiquated structure throughout the value chain, where old relationships that at one point in time added lots of value because these farmers were buried in places that it would be really hard for manufacturers to get to. There was value that those brokers played in actually connecting the chain. Now what's happening is that those brokers are actually perhaps holding the chain a little bit hostage. That information is not as valuable because increasingly manufacturers and buyers of coconut sugar can actually reach farmer organizations that are able to organize themselves in a more efficient manner. And so the role of those brokers is shifting. And as those brokers try to cling to their position, they're actually holding back progress in increases in productivity that we're seeing. And then we're also finding that there is in fact widespread adulteration that we found. Quick snapshot, as we said, most of the production in Indonesia is focused in Java. There is some production in Sumatra and Sulawesi. Mostly the large majority is coconut sugar, but there is some palm sugar as Theo will speak to in a bit. As we talked about, there's been rising demand, and the demand plus the constraints on supply have led to increases in prices and then increase in market value. And that market value is, of course, an opportunity for the industry, but that rapid rise in market value also means that the industry is facing pressures. The buyers are facing pressures to be able to do what they want to do with the sugar in a cost-effective way, which means that at some point in time, they're going to have to search outside for alternative solutions, whether it's sourcing that same input somewhere else outside of Indonesia, or sourcing it from alternative sources, maybe artificial sweeteners. So that's something that the industry needs to recognize as both an opportunity and a risk. Okay. We won't go into the detail of this, but wanted to just give you a sense of how we approach thinking about the value chain and analyzing those value chain constraints. So there are some important constraints that need to be considered from the Indonesian perspective: an aging base of wild trees, in cultivating trees and harvesting, to a constraint around climbers. Many of the climbers are aging, and the younger populations just aren't seeing the same economic return in staying at home and tapping the trees versus going into the urban areas and seeking employment elsewhere. Also constraints in the processing of the sugar. So there is a lot of mixing with cane sugar. The cooking is still, most of the cooking is still happening in the home over a wood fire, as opposed to being done centrally. That's not the case in the Philippines, so that's a big difference between the two countries. And then of course, kind of the aggregating and the packaging, we're not seeing the same kind of standards and quality controls that we would expect in a more mature agricultural value chain. We won't get into the details, but it's just to give you a snapshot in terms of the how we approach the on-farm economics, because on-farm economics really does play an important role in the entire value chain. And if the economics don't work out for the farmer, or only work out in certain instances, that will play a role in both quality and quantity. So we did this exercise for all three countries, although I think we're only sharing it here for Indonesia. You can go into the study to see the other countries. But essentially what it reveals is it reveals the choices that the farmers are making or being forced to consider. Do they produce flock? Do they produce powder? What is the price points that they're able to get for that decision about how far down the chain do they go? And what's the payoff that they get for the hours spent? And cooking is really kind of that key factor of productivity. Do we cook? How do we cook? It's both an economic choice, but also a social choice. And so something to consider. There's advantages and disadvantages to centralizing the cooking, pulling it out of the homes and into a particular place, but it's important to consider kind of what's the impact both socially on the household, but also, of course, economically. What was consistent across the three countries was that palm and coconut sugar as a singular activity is not enough to sustain a household, at least under the current economics and the number of trees that a particular household is able to tap. It is an important source of income, but it can't be the singular source of income for a household. It is combined with a number of different activities that these farmers are engaged in. Okay, and finally, just a kind of a snapshot. We looked at 2 different areas of Indonesia and farmers that were producing powdered organic coconut sugar versus block sugar, and kind of broke down the economics across cooperative, village collector, and farmer in those instances. Okay, just conscious of time and want to make sure that we have enough time for discussion. So we'll move into the Philippines. Philippines is interesting because this is a coconut industry that wasn't heritage. It's really grown from an industry base of large-scale coconut plantations that were installed in the mid-20th century. Up until recently, coconut sugar wasn't seen to be a major product. Really, it was the other coconut products that were being processed and exported. But now coconut sugar is kind of recognized to represent an opportunity for the industry, and so there are plans to grow the industry rapidly in the coming years. However, there's a recognition of some significant constraints. The trees are aging, and there may be challenges in terms of how much growth the Philippines will be able to achieve in the near future. Fortunately for the Philippine government is particularly active in supporting the coconut sector. It's a well-organized, probably, I mean, easily the most well-organized from the government's perspective sector that we saw. And the Philippine Coconut Authority is playing an active role in helping to organize the industry. It hosted the National Coconut Sap Sugar Industry Congress back in 2012 and has intentions to host another one in the coming years, and is even putting funds behind supporting projects to increase financing and productivity initiatives for the farmers. Again, there is some spread across the Philippines, but the majority of production is concentrated in Mindanao and Calabarzon region. So kind of there is a core concentration. Politically, that's a sensitive region, but it's also an important source of income and prosperity for communities that otherwise don't have a lot of other opportunities for income generation. And as we looked at the value chain in the Philippines, what we found is that it's really interesting. They are organized around an export-oriented sector. So this is, and again, it wasn't first export of coconut palm sugar, it was other coconut products. But those large plantations that are also tapping for palm sugar are oriented in a way where the smallholder farmers sit alongside the plantations, and then they all feed in to centralized processors. And so the Philippines was probably the best example of centralized processing that we saw. And there's some very organized and sophisticated processing organizations that are cooking centrally and at a fairly large scale. And then, of course, the most of the coconut palm sugar is exported because there really isn't much demand at this point in time locally. Yeah. Similarly, we did kind of a value chain map and constraints analysis in the Philippines, facing similar issues to Indonesia in terms of the tree stock and the base and the productivity of the trees. They don't actually use anti-fermenting agents, which was interesting. They tap more times per day than the other countries. They also, because of the landscape, whereas in Java the landscape is quite hilly, it's very difficult to jump from tree to tree. You have to climb individual trees. In the Philippines, the plantations provide an opportunity to set up ladders that allow the tappers to cross from tree to tree, which makes tapping much more efficient. And as we said, the central processing units allow for not just a higher level of scale, but also better quality control. So because the processing is happening in one facility, you can process it under a certain quality considerations that, and you can kind of control for things like adulteration. That's a lot harder to do when it's all being cooked in individual households. Okay, finally, Cambodia. So Cambodia, first and foremost, is the sugar is all palm sugar. So while Cambodia has a significant amount of coconut trees, estimates are over 13 million trees, none of them are tapped. The only trees that are tapped are sugar palm, of which there are estimated 3 million trees, and 1 million are currently being tapped. The reason for that is that the coconut plant historically has been used for water and milk, and so really not used for sugar. So the majority of palm sugar production is still artisanal for local markets, and it is a part of the local cuisine, a heritage product. Cambodians appreciate it, and it's part of the kind of from what we heard of both producers and consumers. It's a core part of kind of the household cuisine, in that it's seen to be an important complementary input and sweet, which touches the hearts of many Cambodians from their childhood. Recently, over the past 10, 15 years, the market has been seeded by social entrepreneurs that see that opportunity to take that palm sugar to the rest of the world, and they've actually gone as far as applying for geographic indication in certain parts of Cambodia for the European market, to be able to position Cambodian palm sugar for the European market. But despite kind of some initial efforts from social entrepreneurs, palm sugar is still quite underdeveloped as an industry, and there are lots of opportunities for productivity enhancements. There have been efforts to organize the farmers, but and there's one particular player, Comforel, that's probably taking the lead in the organization. But for now, there's still a lot of work to be done to increase the productivity of farmers, both on farm as well as to help them organize and work out that equation of how much are we cooking, how much are we sending to a centralized facility. So we have, as well, for the value chain in Cambodia, we have a significant base of untapped trees, but the challenge here is around organization. How do you go and tap those trees? Who do you find? How can communities be engaged to tap those trees in an efficient way, in a way that pays off? Interestingly enough, in Cambodia as well, those palm trees right now are only harvested 4 months per year. So that's a particular constraint to integrating the tree into a substantial income generation stream on an annual basis for households. Is it possible to tap those trees more months per year? Maybe, but it wasn't clear. I think that's probably some additional research that could be done. As well, there's a constraint around financing for those smallholder farmers. It's there at this point in time. They are very much regulated to their ability to tap and sell into only a few different buyers. What that means is, in fact, actually that as big buyers come into the country fairly quickly, that surplus is tapped out. And in fact, it can be frustrating for big buyers because they come in, they see an opportunity to buy, there's demand, but in fact, the industry isn't organized well enough to be able to deliver on that demand, and fairly quickly it dries up. So in summary, across the three countries, we see differences in what's referred to as the sugar break ratio, which is the percentage of kilos yield from the sugar from sap, the length of the season, whether the countries are and the tappers are using an anti-fermenting agent, or are they cooking on site? And there are only a few instances where cooking on site is actually being used as a way to delay the fermentation process. Differences in production methods, how many trees are serviced per day, and of course the number of trees and the impact on overall production. So a summary of kind of the market constraints. As we said, there's really very little investment happening right now in terms of scientific research on growing and harvesting and cooking processes. We see that as a huge opportunity to help this industry to kind of evolve, revolutionize itself, and increase its productivity. There is an aging base of low productivity trees that needs to be considered. This was very much a cottage industry in 2 of the 3 countries, and the question is, if this industry is going to modernize itself, there's the question of how do we upgrade the trees fairly quickly. That traditional collector network in Cambodia and especially in Indonesia is holding back investment. And then finally, kind of the financing and the poor market poor economics for the farmers is something that needs to be addressed in order for the farmers to really embrace this activity as one that can compete with other income generating activities. We won't go through in detail the enterprise spotlights. This is just to let you know that in the research, there are a couple of enterprise spotlights, 2 from Indonesia and 1 from Cambodia. So that they're there with detail around how those enterprises are engaging with their farmers, and how they're organizing and then how they're then selling into the market. So coming out of the research, there were some insights that we shared with GrowAsia, and we wanted to share with you in terms of what we saw as a coordination and growth agenda. These are common themes that we've been talking about over the past few minutes, but just to reiterate, first and foremost, work with the international trade authorities to create a separate trade code and distinguish coconut and palm sugar from cane sugar that legitimizes the product on the global stage and allows for the standards that are necessary for the unique characteristics of the product to be implemented by countries. Support the growth and strengthening of regional and national industry groups and governments to adopt those standards and certifications that can address things like adulteration and other quality questions. The cross-market consolidation and learning of best practices. Different countries are doing different things, some good, some bad. There's a lot to be learned across the countries. Hopefully that's come out of the research that the summary of the research that we've showed. And then initiatives on on-farm productivity, for sure. There's a lot that can be done for on-farm productivity and taking advantage of technology and practices that perhaps have been discovered in certain parts of the region can be taken to other parts. And then finally, thinking about new ways of organizing the value chains so that those what were once valuable activities but now have become captured activities like the brokering can be reorganized so that the full market value can be realized by all important actors along the chain. Okay, before I pass it off to Clement and Theo, just want to say that this study wouldn't have been possible without the important cooperation and support from, first and foremost, the farmer associations and their members that we spoke with across the 3 countries. Just really amazing organizations and individual farmers doing great work. The enterprises that sit a bit further down the value chain, both local buyers and exporters that were very generous with their time and their insights. Some local partners that we worked with, CIRD in Cambodia and Generation Hope in the Philippines, both very instrumental in providing deep insights in terms of those local markets. And then, of course, the GrowAsia team, the regional and country secretariats and the teams in country. So thank you to all of you. So without further ado, I'm going to pause because you've heard a lot of my voice over the past 20 minutes and pass the microphone to Clement. As Graham had said, Clement comes from Unilever and has been helping Unilever, especially in Indonesia, think about how it sources coconuts and palm sugar in sustainable but scaled ways. So Clement, it would be great to hear some of your thoughts, perspective, and insights from the work that you've been doing over the past few years.
Okay, thank you, Justin, for giving me the opportunity to talk and to share my experience in that webinar. First of all, I would like to thank you, your team, and GrowAsia for that useful study. It compiled a huge amount of data that are not easy to get, and it gives a good overview of the regional situation and the existing potential in doing trade with coconut and palm sugar. So I think it's a great starting point to gather a learning community, to have some pre-competitive discussion, and obviously to strengthen the palm and coconut trade flow for the region. In terms of regional and industrial challenges, I think that there is a plenty of opportunity to develop coconut and palm sugar supply chain in the region and in the several countries. In terms of opportunity, I think that there's a lot of smallholder farmers that are traditionally producing palm and coconut sugar, and they are looking for opportunities to scale up their production and to develop some business, additional business with that commodity and with that raw material. But also, it's interesting because there are so many specific contexts in each country. The challenges, the situation, the three species are so different that developing all the country in the region are very, very, very challenging, and we evolve in several contexts that need to adapt in several realities. Also, I think that it's clear, as you say, the demand is rising, whether for the local industry, for some specific products such as the sweet soy sauce, the local cuisine, and also interesting the export market, and with huge margin and with high requirements in terms of quality, in terms of supply chain, in terms of certification, in order to reach the retail market in Europe, in Middle East, and even in Asia now. What I would like to focus also is the challenges that we are facing while developing the supply chain. First, I think that the demand is here, but the volume scalability is an important challenge, because the production is still in the hands of smallholder farmers, and it's really important to partner with them and to support them in order to be able to scale the volume produced. Another challenge is the quality. Obviously, as the production is done at smallholder farmer, there is no standard operation procedure that are common into one group of farmer, one region, or in between countries. And I think it's an important job that all the people working in that business need to do in collaboration with all the stakeholders of the supply chain, is to work on quality and avoid product adulteration. Another important challenge that we face is the price fluctuation. Now with the weather change, with El Nino, La Nina coming every 2-3 years, this impact the price. We have many traders, many opportunistic traders that are now trying to enter the supply chain and to lock the supply chain. So this is really difficult for the people who want to work on long-term base in the supply chain, to develop a transparent relationship with the farmer and ensure that the farmer gets the right amount of money compared to the hard work they've done to produce the coconut sugar. So farmer loyalty program is really important to be developed in that supply chain if we want to develop long-term commitments and implementation of the supply chain. And obviously, I think it's really important to work on technology and cross-learnings. Some good innovations are ongoing, and I think it's important to share what's going on and to scale it up. And also, I think, just to conclude, we need to think on the next generation of farmers, because as you mentioned, it's a really hard work to do coconut and palm sugar. And if we want to sustain the demand, if we want to continue collaborate with the smallholder farmer and improve their livelihood, we need to think about what we want to bring to them and to the next generation to design and to build the supply chain for the coming 10 to 20 years. So yeah, I'm looking forward to get Theo input, and I let the floor to you.
That's great. Thank you, Clement, for your thoughts and your perspective from your experience of the past few years working on the issue in the region. At this point, I'll invite Theo to share some of his thoughts from the entrepreneur, the producer's perspective.
Okay, thank you, Justin, for this opportunity. We talked for a long time when you did this investigation. So what I would like to say is that many things you told already is true, and what also Clement said is the problem. I just want to tell you a little bit of how we did it, how our approach was to make a good quality of Arenga palm sugar. First, I have to say the Arenga will never grow in plantations. So the farmer has more trees, more things to do. And we started to look at what their problems and their challenges are. And one of them is the time. The tapping of the tree is not that big of issue. They can do it in a very short time, maybe spending for 5 trees 1 hour per day. But the rest of the day they had to do collecting firewood, do the cooking, preparing all of this. So their day job was totally full with 5 trees. So they would never be able to expand. So we tried to get them off this job. So we started to buy clean juice. Only we asked them to heat it up and sterilize it so it would not ferment anymore. And every day we collect it ourselves and bring it to our facility where we cook it. But first, when we collect it, we look for the quality. We check the quality on the spot with the farmer. If the quality is not okay, then we will refuse it. So we will not bring it to our facility. In our facility, we will do the whole process, especially what Clement said. The quality is very, very important. You have to have a stable quality and a stable amount every day, because you will put your production process on a certain level of what you want to produce every day. So to get this done from the farmers, they had more time to do other things. So even increasing their tapping. Instead of 5 trees, they could tap easily 10 trees and still have more than enough time. And also do some additional farming. So we bring the most time consuming things we take from the farmer, and we do it ourselves in our processing unit. Yeah, what else should I say? The approach with the farmer is very difficult, of course. The problem of the tappers getting older is also a very big problem, a big issue. So we try to get some school education, and to make it not call them farmers anymore, but call them producers. So we had set up an education program, now doing in Kalimantan, West Kalimantan, and it's working really well. More people getting interested, more people want to get back to their village because they see the value of producing the juice, the sugar. And to give them more opportunities to do something else, they will support the juice delivery. The problem is always the same for them. is mostly logistic. It's also remote area. I hear that saying already. The remote area, so the people, the farmer is not really eager to walk up the mountain with a lot of weight on his shoulders 3-4 times. So we try to find some solutions in that how it would be easy to get the juice down, and we have some success with it. We make collection points, so then bring it down with a big pipe system, and it's all working. But yeah, the biggest is still how to convince the farmer to tap and to make sure that he will keep on tapping. Because as a factory, and you need a certain amount of juice, you need to produce a certain amount of sugar, because our buyers, you make agreements with the buyers, so you have to get a stable quality, you have to get a stable amount of juice coming in, and that's still a big challenge. So you have to start very slow by convincing the farmer that it's a really good job for them and increasing their livelihood, but as less possible put all the work at the farmer. Take from the farmer what they are not really like to do even, and it's not really healthy. The cooking on the firewood is not really healthy. There are different ways to do it. And then they start getting the trust that they can sell every day their juice. Because the most important things for the farmer, I think, is stability. And to get a regular income and not a seasonal income. And so you have to make sure as an organization that you always will buy, even when you don't have the sales at that moment. You still have to pick it up, you still have to buy, and you have to gain trust from all these farmers. And by giving them another production possibility, even on their land with efficient stoves, and there are more possibilities, then yeah, you can get the community growing and get them together.
Great.
I hope this was enough information.
Yes, very much so. Thank you, Theo. That was great, and in fact, it echoes and reinforces what we had learned from you and heard from others as well, in terms of what might be some models of engaging farmers, bringing them, the producers, bringing them back in and to this activity in a way that allows them to see it as an activity that perhaps complements other activities and can really be an important part of a prosperous household income. So, okay, great. So did we get a couple of questions that came in? Yeah. Okay, so thank you for those that had sent through some questions. We're going to move into questions. If you have other questions, please go ahead and enter them into the webinar chat box. Let's see, the first question that came in, where can individuals access and read the full report? So essentially after this discussion, Pranav will send out a link via the chat to the full report, and you can also find it via the GrowAsia knowledge exchange. Another question that popped up was around the role of the government, and what might be a role that the government could play that would be helpful. And so essentially, as you heard in parts of my description of the study, the role of government can be helpful in really three ways. One is helping the industry to legitimize itself regionally and internationally by promoting its distinctive qualities and its potential. to deliver prosperity for the entire value chain in their countries. In addition, the government can be helpful in helping the industry to really set and enforce those standards to make sure that that quality is enhanced. And then the third way that we saw from PCA in the Philippines was in helping to provide assistance, technical and financial assistance and frameworks for farmers, for the producers themselves, to ensure that the producers are exposed to the best practices, but then also have the financial frameworks and the tools that they need to make sure that they're able to secure a reliable source of income over time, and they're able to make certain investments that everyone does need to make in their business, no matter what they do on a regular basis, to keep themselves as productive as possible. Let's see, so another question that came in, is there an alternative to climbing for harvesting? Is there technology where the sap can be collected on the ground using some kind of bucket through some kind of pipe? I'll respond to that, and then it would be great to hear from Theo as well, because perhaps I know you've looked specifically at ways of increasing the harvesting productivity. We looked at that, we asked those questions, and the resounding response back was no across the countries, and the reason being that the tapping itself, the cutting of the flower on both trees is a very human-driven process. And it's really hard to do that when you're not actually up in the tree itself and able to cut the flower in the right way and collect the sap as it comes out. So it seems like it should be possible, but at this point in time, for the traditional trees, the tall trees, the best technology that we saw were the ladders, the horizontal ladders that the Philippines was using because of their unique flat landscape that enabled producers, once they climbed up, to be able to go from tree to tree without having to climb back down again. That said, Graham reminded me, and in fact, it is starting to come into Indonesia. There are some dwarf varieties of coconut trees that India has developed and are starting to be spread across Southeast Asia. And those dwarf trees represent an opportunity because instead of having to climb, the tree only grows so high, and so you're able to tap it without too much ascent. I guess, Theo, it would be interesting to hear from you in terms of how you've approached the actual increasing of productivity of the tapping itself.
Okay, thank you. You say no, but I think I didn't say no to you. We are testing now possibilities to get the trees or don't have to climb so high every time.
Okay.
But the biggest challenge is how to stop the fermenting of the juice when it's on top of the tree. So they are all right. You have to clean the stem where the sap is coming out from. But if you can protect it in the right way, so the fermenting will not happen on the stem. And we now testing this principle, and it does look that it will work. And then it's maybe only once every 2 or 3 days that you have to climb the tree, but still in process.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's okay. That's interesting to hear, and certainly also a great example of how it's possible to do experimentation constantly to be increasing the productivity. That's would be interesting to kind of hear how that pans out. Of course, we recognize that your practices are proprietary, but just hearing that it's possible and that you are finding some successes is quite encouraging.
Okay.
Okay, so we just covered number 5. So which country has best-in-class practice for coconut sugar production? In the 3 countries that we looked at, in terms of the processing itself, the country that was far out in front was the Philippines in terms of the central processing units. The other 2 countries are most of the cooking for now is happening, with the exception, I know, of the organizations that you've been working with, Teo, because I know you've been doing a separate model of centralized processing. In aggregate, the Philippines had the best example of those centralized processing units that were able to get to scale and control for quality.
Great.
Let's see. What are we expecting in the coconut sugar international market in the future? Is it a sustainable industry? Great question. I guess in terms of sustainable, there are a couple of different ways to interpret that term sustainable. In this case, we'll assume that it means viable. There are certainly questions around environmental sustainability of the industry. As the industry grows, there are going to be some questions around that, as if in fact the industry goes to plantation, and that's the case for other plantation crops as well. But if we think about just the current stock of trees, which are mostly wild trees, and how to increase the productivity of those trees to meet that market demand, it does appear that as coconut and palm sugar increase their presence in international markets, it's being positioned, providing that the suppliers can continue to deliver on quality. It's positioning itself in a premium way, which does present an opportunity, at least, for a viable value chain for all actors along the value chain, assuming that the value chain is managed in a transparent and fair way. So we do think from the economic side, yes, it appears that there is good prospects for a growing, viable market to be supplying. In terms of environmental sustainability, I think that's a separate question that certainly the industry is going to have to grapple with if it decides to go down the path of getting to scale over and above the current tree stock. Next question. Has any study been done in West Africa? If so, please share. If not, is there a plan to carry one out? We didn't come across, we did hear some stories from West Africa, but we didn't come across a comprehensive study like this one in West Africa. That's not to say it hasn't been done, but we just didn't come across it in our desktop research. And is there a plan to carry one out? We're not aware of one, but perhaps there is an organization that's working in West Africa that we could send the study to and say it might be interesting to do something in West Africa. Next question: who are the partners working on creating market linkages for these products? How were they approached or chosen? So this study wasn't about identifying partners for market linkages. They do exist, but what we found is that there are very few just pure market makers. Mm-hmm. There are exporters that are playing the role of linking producers and buyers, but at this point in time, there don't appear to be formal organizations that are playing kind of a market linkages role, outside of a couple of NGOs or donor-based organizations that have a community that they're working with, and they're trying to assist that community in improving the quality and getting to market with their coconut or palm sugar. So next question: how do you granulate coconut sugar in Indonesia? Is it manual, continuous stirring, or mechanized? So the answer, at least from everything that we witnessed, is in-house and manual, so continuous storing, which is part of the labor. You may have noticed that on the on-farm economics in Indonesia, there were 8 hours a day of cooking, and so that cooking is a very manual process. The next question. What are the product requirements for entering the European and US markets? That's an excellent question, and requires a lot more detail. We didn't go into it. We did have the opportunity to speak with some exporters in Indonesia that have gone through that process of understanding European and US product specifications. They were very generous with their time in walking us through all of the difficulties and challenges in that process. Of course, those markets represent significant opportunity, but they come with the cost of time and energy of understanding what those specifications are, and they are quite different. So it's not like you can do both in one go. You have to really invest the time and energy of understanding specifications of each of those markets in order to be able to deliver. And they were quite clear that they saw that as an investment of their time. And it's one that entrepreneurs have to factor in if they're going to try to go after those markets. So next question. According to the EU, palm sugar is not defined in the directives relating to certain sugars intended for human consumption. Do you think this can be a trade barrier for exporting palm sugar to the EU in the future? Interesting. This is the first that I've been aware of this. It runs contrary to actually the EU's activities that we saw in the region, especially in Cambodia, because the EU is actively working with the palm sugar producers to explore geographic indication. So that
Hi everyone, sorry, just slight technical difficulty. Justin's been cut off, so we will use this speaker instead.
Everybody can hear us still. Apologies for the difficulty. And we can. So in terms of the, is it a barrier? Not certain about that. It might be a little hiccup along the way, but not something that I would suspect would be a long-term one, at least from everything we heard when talking to EU representatives. What are the benefits of growing dwarf variety of coconut trees? Farmers are resistant to grow their variety due to theft, as the trees aren't tall compared to the tall variety. That's an excellent question. We actually didn't see any examples of the dwarf varieties in the 3 countries. I know that there are a few examples of the dwarf trees being introduced, but it wasn't substantial enough for us to be able to answer that question. But I think it's an important one to consider as organizations are working with farmers to perhaps adopt those trees. Next question. Yeah. What's the current tariff imposed on coconut sugar by the U.S.? Again, excellent question. We actually didn't get into that level of detail in terms of market information. And of course, we know that the U.S. is reevaluating its tariff structure as we speak. I do think because certain countries aren't producing, certain unsaid countries aren't producing coconut sugar, that it would necessarily fall under that list of increasing tariffs, but you never can be sure at this point in time. So it's something that would be interesting to explore. We did not get to that information. Can you explain further on the CPU in the Philippines? Sure. So essentially the CPU in the Philippines, these are organizations, cooperatives that have been developed, and if you're interested in it, there are actually some great informative videos that some of these organizations have posted on YouTube to promote their work and the coconut and palm sugar industry. that are very detailed in terms of showing how they work, but essentially they are central collection points. They operate similar to, if you know the dairy industry, to collection points in the dairy industry. And so farmers bring their sap to these collection units on a daily basis, and then the cooking happens at these facilities. And they're the ones that we saw in Philippines. They very much are community facilities. So one of the social benefits that the organization gets is actually from the cookers being able now to cook together, as opposed to being based in their homes. And this historically has been more of a female activity, although males are cooking as well in their homes. But one of the things that we heard was that there's economic benefit from everyone in terms of increased quality, but there's also a social benefit of bringing that activity out of the house and making it more social. How do you plan for weather constraints in the industry? That's a very difficult question. I think that's something that the coconut palm sector is in company with pretty much every other agricultural sector, and that's really hard to do. Clement made a comment as such. I think that everybody's kind of learning how to do that as climate change is impacting the industry. The next question, is there any distinguishable difference between coconut sugar made from the dwarf variety of coconut and coconut sugar from the tall? Very interesting question. There wasn't anything that came out of our research, but I think it would be worth exploring. Is there any product differentiation, and will the dwarf tree somehow deliver a different value of product, either higher or lower? I think it's an excellent question, one that didn't come up in our research, but definitely worth exploring in the future. And just a couple more questions for those of you that are coming on. What's the best branding for coconut sugar? Should we brand it as cocoa nectar sweetener? For differentiation from cane sugar, isn't it supposed to be a special type of sugar like stevia, etc.? I think that's an interesting strategic question, and certainly there is what we're witnessing is there is an opportunity to differentiate coconut and palm sugar from cane sugar, and even perhaps stepping away from that term sugar is a possibility for the exporters and the retailers to be thinking about kind of the rebranding of it is definitely something that would be interesting to do.
I've got a couple of questions. And this, I mean, the first one was for you, Clement. Can you just give us a thumbnail sketch of what has happened in the attempt to export out of the Philippines into the Indonesian market coconut sugar for sweet soy? What were the problems about doing that? And the question I had for Tao was that I've heard a couple of things. One was an example where somebody was planting an estate of either coconuts or palm sugar and then allocating the trees numbers to individual tappers and working on a shared value basis on that, whether you had heard about that. And finally, how much is in the public domain known about the ways that you can increase the yield of these particular products? I think there are things around fertilizer, the angle that you hold the flower and so on.
Yeah, so in terms of developing regional markets, as I said before, the biggest challenge is the scale, because we are in touch with many producers and our coconut sugar exporters. But the big issue is the volume. Like if they are able to produce 1 container per week, one container every 2 weeks, we could start a business relationship. But often the production capability is lower than that. So If it is lower than that, then you start to get a coconut sugar quality issue, because the coconut sugar is stored for too long time before being shipped. So that's the main constraint in developing the regional market for the industry, because the industry needs a much higher volume compared to retail market. And so this is my learning since I work in that supply chain, is how we can scale up, and when we develop new supplier, to evaluate their capability to reach the minimum scale that they could to develop the export and to fulfill the industry demand. After that, in terms of supporting the farmer and technology, as you mentioned, Philippines is relatively advanced in the region, and there are some interesting cooking facilities there that I do believe in Indonesia there exist too. But now the question is how we can scale this cooking facility and transfer them from a private company who looks for export to smallholder farmer organizations. And that's a challenge that we are facing now, because obviously, as Theo mentioned before, the best way to improve the quality and strengthen the supply chain is to avoid the cooking process at farmer level, but to set up central cooking facilities in order to help the farmer to ease the work of the farmers and to streamline the production and the standard operation procedure, and to get an harmonized quality. So if a potential exporter can reach and organize the smallholder farmer to do that, after that the industry would be happy to start to some trade flow with them and will support the offtake of that product. And yeah, the last, if I can, the last point I've seen is that setting up new project, you need financial, quite a significant financial investment, and you need some liquidity. So when you start a project and when you want to supply coconut sugar, even for export or for the industry, yeah, the project investor need to have a significant amount of money in order to invest in the facilities, in order to bear the first batch that will be cheap and the first payment. And often I see really nice initiative, but lacking of funds, and the fund constraints then limits the project implementation.
Perfect. Tao? Oh, yeah, that's fine. I mean, just one question though, Clement. Just give us a sense.
If there is, yeah.
Yeah, go on, Tao. That's fine.
No, go ahead, Justin. You have another question?
Actually, it was Graham, but it was just to give you that. I just wanted a sense for a container. How many tons of product are you talking about there? I presume this is a 20-foot container. It's about.
Yes, 20-foot container. It's a minimum, yeah, container that you can fill.
And how many tons of product would that be?
18 tons.
18.
Okay, great. And then Theo, there was just a question around your experience in terms of exploring various techniques to improve tapping and productivity of tapping. Would be great to hear from you on that.
We non-stop looking for other possibilities to tap and to increase the productivity, especially also by selecting the very good trees, looking at them, how they work, how many fruits they give, how many juice. Even in the tapping process, you can, if you know how to do it, you can regulate your juice. We tested it. Normally, average, our tree has to give 20 liters per day minimum. But we pushed also trees and we could give them that, we could prepare them that they would give 100 liters per day, but then they only survive like 3-4 weeks and then die. So you have to find the right amount of juice they have to give before you start tapping them, and that yeah, there you need some technology and to know the tree and know what you are doing, and also have the right trees. And I suppose that's also the same issue for the coconut, but I'm not really sure. And also our processing way is different than from coconut. I've seen many coconut producers, how they process it. They cook it, they make a big syrup, then start to cool it and crush it by hand. We don't do that. We have a big evaporator, we bring it up till 80%, then do it in an open pan. We cook it the last part and it will be crystallized in the pan. So we don't have to crush it. But there's also some technology, and I would be more than happy to test the coconut sugar in the way we produce it to see if it would work. That would be perfect.
Great. No, I
Yeah,
think
maybe if I can add also, Justin, about how we can collect the sap without climbing, because yeah, it's a very important issue, and for the next generation of farmer or producer, it's gonna be an important question. I've seen in Indonesia, for example, that the university was trying a robot that can climb the tree and then have articulated arms and cut the flower. So if we partner with university, they can come up with some innovative approach. And know that we are entering in a digital world. Also, we are considering the use of drone to cut the flower and to do some work at 8. So if you are able to register some parameters about the flower inclination and how the drone will use some blades to cut the flower, this could be innovation that we could bring to the supply chain, and that could ease the sap collect. So I think, yeah, looking at other company, what they are doing in other domain, and trying to transfer that technology and these learnings to the coconut and palm sugar supply chain can bring to some very interesting and innovative solutions.
Okay.
that would be an exciting evolution of the producer, and certainly an upskilling if the producer were to go from climber and tapper to drone operator. So it's, for sure there's a lot to be learned outside. Thank you both for your comments. I think that they illustrate the kind of the possibilities for helping the industry to upgrade itself and meet this rising demand. So just a couple of last questions. We're bumping up against time. So first, in your presentation, there's a photo of a product written as coconut palm sugar. Is this product a mixture of coconut sugar and palm sugar? Our understanding is no, it comes from Indonesia, and it's purely coconut sugar, but we didn't speak to the retailer or the packager directly, so we don't know for sure. Our own hypothesis was that it helped them to actually market to both those that were looking for coconut sugar and for palm sugar, recognizing that it's almost an equivalent product in the market. We've talked, there was a question around mechanizing the granulation of coconut sugar. We talked a little bit about that. Is it possible? I think that's still to be determined. For now, all of the cooking that we saw was manual. Okay, great. Well, so with that, we're bumping up against time. Really appreciate everyone that's stuck around for almost a full 90 minutes. That's hard to do on a webinar platform. So appreciate your engagement and your interest in the topic and your great questions that you sent through. A very special thank you to Clement and to Theo for joining us and providing their inputs. With that, and thank you all for joining us, I'll pass it back over to Grant.
Okay, I mean, just thank you very much, Justin, for consolidating a huge amount of information, keeping it really interested. It was very interesting to see the numbers of people on there, how actually they've really held up throughout that 90 minutes. And I think all three of you have kept people's attention. So next steps. The first thing is that you will all receive a link to the major report, which will go into much more detail, and you can drill into that information. The second thing is to say to you, is there a demand for us to create a community of practice so that you know who one another is, so that you can communicate with one another? You made some very interesting suggestions about the ideas of linking with universities. Is that something that we can tie in with our work around the GrowAsia Learning Alliances? But for us, this has been a good experience. I think this has been a first-class piece of work by Justin and your team, so thank you. And the fact that those practitioners acknowledged the fact that you got it right is a real accolade for you to get. But mainly I wanted to thank the people's attention who gave up their time to listen into this, and we would love to get some feedback from you about whether this was the kind of communication which helped you, and if there are ways that we could do it better, please let us know. So on that note, thanks again, and over and out.